welcome to the Ruth MacFit Podcast. I'm very happy to be here with you today. I'm actually feeling pretty proud of myself because I've not been feeling 100%. And old me would have thought, well, I'm not properly ill. The cold hasn't fully developed, feel a bit wheezy, blah, 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 get out and run anyway. Now, I'm all for giving things a go. But I decided on Saturday to not do my brunch run, but to walk the same route instead, which was great because I'm still doing the same distance. I'm still getting out, but I'm not putting quite so much strain on my body. I felt like if I was running and breathing heavily, that perhaps it could push me over the edge. And I feel like that probably helped. I'm still not feeling 100%, but I haven't got worse, which is brilliant. And I had a couple of reflections on that walk. So I was walking pretty much the same route that I normally would run. I did a slightly more direct route because I went over the top of a hill, over the moors, whereas I normally stick lower down and kind of zigzag around because that is the way that the path goes. But when I'm walking, I thought, I'll go over the top. Actually made it about a mile shorter in total. And because it was a route that I normally run, there were points where I was like, am I not there yet? This is taking a long time. So reflection point number one is, yes, walking does, surprisingly enough, take longer than running. But it was lovely. I noticed things I didn't normally notice, which is great. The other reflection point I had is when I looked at my Fitbit and it was showing me that I had covered quite a lot of steps. And I thought, I definitely do less when I'm running. Now, I know that you're out for less time and I know that things are going to be different when you're running compared to walking. But I did a bit of a deep dive into this. I got a bit of an obsession as to what the difference was. And it's to do with our stride length, right? So on that same route, I was doing about 1,000 less steps running as I am when I was walking that route, which I thought was quite interesting. And again, down to the stride length. So I covered a lot more steps walking than I did running. Anyway, just in case you were interested in that too, I thought I would share it. And while we're talking about reflecting, I have been reflecting quite a bit recently on what it is that drives us to want to change. Because I often see people chasing thinness. And don't get me wrong, I used to do this as well. I used to think that thin was the answer, that it's going to fix everything. But thin doesn't automatically mean healthy, which I think we sometimes forget. And it definitely isn't going to guarantee that we feel good. If I could choose something for everyone, it's that they feel good while they're making change, so that they have more energy, that they feel stronger in their body and they have that calmer mind. And then from that, the confidence and just generally feeling better grows. And this came up recently when I was listening to a podcast with a doctor about GLP-1 medication. And it struck me how much the doctors emphasise the need to pair taking these medications with protein and strength training. Otherwise, you risk losing muscle mass. And in midlife, losing muscle mass is something that we definitely want to avoid because it's happening on its own anyway. And it's not as a direct result of taking the medication, but it's because any very low-calorie diet can lead to loss of muscle mass. It's just very hard to sustain those low-calorie diets without the medication. But regardless of whether you're taking GLP-1s, those habits of eating more protein and lifting weights or resistance training in some form are going to help with fat loss. And more importantly, they're also going to have you feeling so much better. I was chatting to a client this past week and she said something that stopped and made me think. She has made incredible progress and huge changes. But before starting, she was feeling extremely low in energy. She'd gained weight and she was struggling to do the things that she'd enjoyed doing in the past. And she was saying that she doesn't think people fully realise how important their health is until they lose it, until they can't do those things anymore. And by then it can feel like you've hit rock bottom. And she said prior to being at that very low point, she would have likely been tempted by thinness by any means without thinking about how it would make her feel long term. So in this episode, I really want to explore whether we do need to hit that low point in order to change. And then if we don't, how can we make decisions to change that are as powerful as a wake-up call without waiting for that crisis? So my own journey with this started back in 2014. I've mentioned it before when I had rheumatic fever. The recovery was long, and it was 2015 when I started strength training properly for the first time. I'd been to the gym in the past, for my teens and so on, doing a bit of machine weights here and there, but this was the first time I'd really gone into strength training. And I did this because I realized I wasn't getting better on my own. And I don't think I'd ever really appreciated before that point how good it feels to be strong. That was definitely a pivotal moment for me, discovering that strength and how it made me feel so much better. But really, back then, I was only focused on the training. Whenever I thought about nutrition, it wasn't to optimize my health or my performance. It really was just about weight loss. It was, what do I need to cut out? Never, what should I be putting in? I definitely wasn't thinking about eating a better breakfast, getting more nutrients, cutting back on my nightly glass of wine. It was just restriction. How can I lose weight and how can I do that quickly? And even when I started working as a PT, I would talk about being optimal with nutrition, but I didn't really have the right balance for me yet. I don't think the real turning point came until much later. In 2022, we'd just moved back from being in Barbados. I'd turned 40 and I'd had some blood tests that flagged that I had a very high hormone level. Prolactin was the hormone. And it was the second time this had been flagged as being very high. And so they wanted me to go and have an MRI to check my pituitary gland. And I did this a couple of times and everything was fine. But what really struck with me, again, was that I was going to have to do something myself about this. The doctors had spoken about whether I was under any extra stress, and I didn't feel stressed in particular. But the more that I thought about it, the more I realised it wasn't that obvious day-to-day stress. It was the fact that I wasn't paying attention to those small things that kept me feeling calm, that kept me feeling in control. I was living in this constant reaction mode. And I think the thing about chronic stress is that we don't notice it anymore. It becomes our normal. I would have these exhaustion moments, which were normal for me. And saying yes was part of who I was. And I was hugely self-critical. And it was actually when I was out for a walk one day and I was listening to a book that I realised I needed things to change and that I did have more control than perhaps I'd told myself before. And I remember thinking of the Taylor Swift song. Like, I'm not a big Taylor Swift fan, but it was the I'm the problem, it's me. And by change, I didn't mean change in terms of dieting or pushing harder, but in terms of it was time I started really looking after myself. And I had the training under control, but this was going to be the mind stuff. And I actually started with gratitude, with focusing on what I could do instead of what I couldn't. And I took the pressure off, like really took it off. I wasn't chasing fat loss. I wasn't tracking calories. I just tried to optimize my health, eating breakfast, focusing on what I could do and being proud of that. And at that point, I had gained a bit of weight. But over the next year, without even trying, I just lost it. I didn't even notice until we went away. I put on a bikini and I realized it was too big. What had changed wasn't restriction. It was the fact that I'd built in these habits that made me feel good. I would have been in a deficit, but not consciously. I was having more protein in my meals and I'd focused on consistency of those basic things. And if I look back now, I know that at my thinnest, I wasn't healthier and happier. I'm not my smallest right now by any means, but I definitely feel the healthiest and happiest. And that shift only came when I stopped chasing thinness and started making health and self-care the main goal. And this is what the research shows us as well when we look at the psychology of why we wait to change. There's actually a very well-researched framework in psychology called the health belief model. And I think this explains so much of what we see when it comes to health and behavior change. According to the health belief model, people are most likely to take action when 4 things line up. So they believe they're personally at risk. They believe the risk is serious. They believe there's something that they can do about it. And most importantly, they believe they're capable of doing it. Now, if you think about it, most of us don't really feel number 1 and 2, risk and severity, until something actually happens. Maybe it's an injury, maybe it's perimenopause symptoms creeping in, maybe it's back pain that suddenly stops you from doing the things that you love. That can be when those wake-up calls happen. Psychologists call these moments teachable moments. They're those times in life when something shifts in how we see ourselves. A diagnosis, a new life stage, even something like kids leaving home or moving house, those sorts of transitions, they shake up your routine and suddenly you're much more aware of your health and the choices you're making. But even when you've got that wake-up call, if number 3 and number 4 are missing, if you don't see a clear action or you don't believe that you're capable, then nothing changes. And that's why so many people have the scare, but they still stay stuck. The client that I worked with had been dealing with severe back pain. That was her wake-up call. It was health focused. The pain made her want to change, but she didn't believe at that point she was capable of doing what she needed to do. So the only way forward was breaking it right down into manageable steps. For her, that looked like those pajama workouts, a couple of exercises each morning, and just walking to the end of the road, just getting her moving a little bit more. And for some people, it might mean starting with seated exercises. The point is, when we make it simple enough that someone believes, yes, actually, that is something I can do, then they're more likely to start. And then once they start, they build that evidence that they are capable. And this is what I found myself. If you told me years ago that little things like gratitude or mindset work would change how I feel, I would have laughed at you and called it woo-woo. But when I started making those tiny changes, I started to build evidence for myself. And that evidence makes it so much easier now, because even when those old self-limiting beliefs do creep in, which they do, I can say to myself, no, I've done this before. I know what works. I know those beliefs aren't true. I know these feelings will pass. And that's it. You know, the more we proved it to ourselves, the more we start to believe it. And I think that's why it can be hard at the beginning, but it gets easier. That belief, that self-efficacy is what makes change stick long term. Not the crisis itself, but the confidence that comes after you start to take action, no matter how small. It is harder at the beginning, but it does get easier. So if the psychology is explaining to us why we wait, what will happen if we just keep waiting? A wake-up call, I think, looks different for everyone. For some women, it might be perimenopause symptoms. You know, suddenly you've got that severe joint pain, you're exhausted, you feel rubbish. The things that you've managed in the past, you can't manage anymore. For others, it's going to be health-related problems that cause exhaustion and make you realise that the only way forward is to focus on your health. And then it might be that for some, it's going to be going out with your family and realising that you can't join in with the activities that you used to love. Or even just sitting down on the floor and noticing that you can't get up anymore without help. It varies so much from person to person, but there's usually that moment of, right, enough is enough. Psychologists actually describe this as something called the region beta paradox. It's the idea that we often put up with things that are mildly bad for much longer than we should, because they're just about manageable. So you carry on coping with the tiredness, with the poor sleep or the low energy, thinking it's normal for you. But when things start to get much worse, that's when you finally start to take action. And that's what often pushes people to change. But the other thing that I think we should mention here that does play into this is what's called optimism bias. We might have been warned by our doctor that we need to take action because of being pre-diabetic or because of heart-related issues. And we tell ourselves, oh, those things don't happen to me. They happen to other people. I'll be fine. And we keep putting up with feeling just okay until suddenly it's not fine. And we're the ones facing that wake-up call. So between those two things, putting up with the manageable stuff for too long and assuming that the really bad stuff won't happen to us, it's easy to see why many people do actually wait. And I think that's why those wake-up calls can feel so powerful when they do come. I was chatting earlier about the member who was saying that she felt she didn't appreciate her health until it wasn't there, and how she has made incredible change. But I remember the week after she started with me, she told me she'd been walking with her husband and she cried because she couldn't keep up with him. She was just exhausted and she hated the fact that she couldn't do the things that she loved anymore. But if we fast forward to today, you'll find that his pace is now an easy pace for her. But it was that wake-up call, those sorts of things that pushed her to take action. But the difference is that she built up steadily and in this controlled way, and that is why she has made such incredible progress. The key thing is that it's never too late to start, but it's easier when we start sooner. Because if you've already built that foundation of strength, of energy and health, you don't have to hit the same level of crisis before you feel the benefits. The earlier you start, the easier the journey is. So the question is, if we don't want to wait for a crisis, which I'm sure a lot of people don't, how do we make a decision to change that's as powerful as a wake-up call? And one of the most powerful things I've ever done for myself is a simple visualization. I think of it as standing at a fork in the road. This is one that was done with a coach with me, actually. On one side is the road where I carry on exactly as I am. And on the other side of the fork is the road where I start making changes, the small changes that I'm talking about. And I picture myself sitting at the end of each road, maybe sitting in a rocking chair, and I think about who's there at the end of the first road. How does she feel? What is she looking back on? What adventures has that person been on? And then I picture the other road, the one where I have made the changes I felt drawn to make. Who's at the end of that road? What is she looking back on? And when I've done this myself, I've realised that the woman at the end of the road where I didn't change isn't the happy older lady looking back on a life of time well spent, adventures had. And I didn't want that. That realization made my decisions so much clearer to me. It gave me that urgency, but without the need for hitting a crisis. And this isn't just about imagination. Psychologists actually call it mental contrasting, when you look at both the costs of not acting and the benefit of acting. And research shows it makes change feel both urgent and achievable, and that is why it works. The second thing is going to be focusing on quick wins, those habits that give you a boost almost immediately, the ones that are going to actually help you feel that difference. And that might be within minutes, within hours, or within the day. For me, one of these was going to be eating breakfast, which included plenty of protein. It sounds silly, but it gave me more energy. It stopped me getting that slump, and it stopped me just picking on random snacks later in the day, which I noticed immediately. But it could also be movement that feels manageable, maybe a 10-minute walk. And the trick is to make sure that you're taking time to notice how you feel afterwards. Do you feel more energized? Do you have a clearer head? Maybe perhaps even a better mood. And when you experience that straight away, it's easier to believe that it's worth doing it again tomorrow. Sometimes we do just need to make ourselves do these things for a bit, but really taking time to see how it feels is brilliant. And then you might also be including things like drinking water first thing in the morning. A lot of us mistake dehydration for hunger or fatigue, and you drink a glass of water and suddenly you've got more clarity, more focus. See, science backs all of this up. Protein helps you feel fuller for longer and protects our muscle. Walking boosts our daily energy without draining you, and it's also been shown to improve our mood. Hydration is going to affect our concentration and our energy levels almost instantly. And these small changes give you proof that healthy habits don't just pay off months down the line, they make you feel better today. And that makes you want to keep going. The third thing that I want to mention here is using transitions. There's a really interesting piece of research called the habit discontinuity hypothesis. And basically, this is when life changes. That could be a new job, kids go back to school, moving house. Your routines are shaken up, and that can be the perfect time to add new habits. It's easier to do something when everything else is already shifting. Instead of seeing those times as disruptions, you can use them as opportunities to reset. And the fourth is using identity statements. This is an absolute favourite of mine. When I first started with gratitude lists, I struggled. So I'd write things like, I'm grateful for the birds singing outside my window. I'm grateful for my comfy bed. But over time, those shifted a bit into identity-based gratitudes. Things like, I'm grateful I'm someone who never gives up. Or I always feel better when I eat breakfast, those types of things. But it could also be things like, I'm the kind of person who always feels better after exercise. I'm the kind of person who enjoys eating healthy food. And this works because research shows that identity-based habits are much stronger than outcome-based ones. If you see yourself as the kind of person who, as I've said before, perhaps feels better after exercise, enjoys healthy food, then the actions naturally follow. And finally, we have accountability. We know from research on consistency bias that when you tell someone you're going to do something, you're much more likely to follow through. And it could be that this is telling your partner, a friend, or even posting about it online. Just having that external commitment makes a difference. And that's why coaching can also be powerful, because you've got that safe space where someone supports you and holds you accountable and celebrates your wins along the way. It's why I love the forums in the No Crap Cake method, because in there, the women will share what they're going to be focusing on the following day and so on. And automatically they're committing to themselves, but they've also told us as well. And the thing that all of these strategies that I've mentioned have in common is that they are going to help you feel good quickly. You don't have to wait months to notice a difference, and that's what makes the decisions stick. When the actions feel good in the short term, you then build that belief in yourself, and that belief is just as powerful as any wake-up call. I want to share a couple of client stories here so that we can see how this might look in real life. And because not every wake-up call looks the same, and not every wake-up call is going to be a health scare or hitting rock bottom physically. I know for a lot of women that I work with, the thing that finally makes them change is realizing that they can't face yet another diet. They've been on this roller coaster again and again, and they're just exhausted by it. One of my lovely clients, Kate, is a perfect example of this. You know, in every single check-in, I've mentioned her before, she writes that her goal is to lose weight in a calm way, a happy way, while still enjoying herself, because in the past, fat loss has been the only goal. And this can really feel like a full-time job. I'm sure many of you can relate to that. And I think that by the time we get to midlife, we're done with that. So instead of throwing herself into another round of all or nothing dieting, Kate focused on what she could do and accepted that this might look different from day to day. She started building those habits that supported her health and gave her more energy. And what's really, really powerful is the way she talks about her progress. In her check-in just today, she mentioned that her clothes are looser. She talks about feeling fitter. And she told me that each time she goes to the zoo, she notices that she can move around more easily and take more photos. And did you notice there what she didn't mention? She didn't mention the scales once, because for Kate, the focus has shifted away from chasing a number on the scales and for it only being about thinness. And now it's about enjoying life. And that really is a huge transformation. I also want to tell you about another Kate, a Kate I worked with many years ago. And I want to share her story because she was one of the first people that I talked about no crap cake with. She fully embraced this concept. But when she came to me, she was feeling pretty helpless. She'd gained weight through perimenopause, and she'd read all over the internet and so on and seen things popping up on her feed about how weight gain at this stage of life was inevitable. And she felt that perhaps it was just fully out of her control. She'd been quite all or nothing in the past, and she really did embrace the no crap cake condition and making choices that fitted with her life and things that made her feel good. And I think the change that she experienced also proves something really important, and that's that we actually have far more control in perimenopause than we often believe we do. And like I said, I do love telling her story because she is one of the first people I started talking to about no crap cake. And that has grown into the no crap cake method now, which is a whole approach about helping women feel healthier, happier and stronger without the all or nothing. So I'm glad that she really took on board the no crap cake chat. So let's circle back to those big questions that I started with. Do we actually need to hit rock bottom or hit a very low point in order to change? And how do you actually make a decision to change as effective as a wake-up call, as one of those moments? What we've seen is that, no, you don't have to wait for a major crisis. For some people, that wake-up call does come from a health issue or exhaustion or not being able to do the things that we love. But what really makes change stick is when you build belief in yourself, one small action at a time. When you choose those habits that have you feeling good now, stronger in your body, calmer in your mind, more energized in your day, and you keep building from there. Because there will come a moment when you realize that health and feeling great is the ultimate goal. And if I could have one wish for everyone who is listening, it would be this: make it more than thin. Whatever approach you choose to take, whether that's medication, calorie tracking, or something else entirely, make sure you're including the habits that will have you feeling your best, not just today, but for the longest time possible. Things like self-care, movement, nutrition that fuels you, sleep, connection, in whatever small way feels doable right now. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast episode today. If it's resonated with you, then I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment on the podcast page. Get in touch via Instagram at Ruth MacFit. But do also like, share and subscribe to this podcast because it helps others find it as well. It's been lovely chatting with you today. I look forward to speaking to you again next time.